Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Those who can turn their cameras on, it's always helpful. And I'll share my screen. And today's our second share on Shmuel, on Sefer Shmuel. We're going to finish Shmuel Aleph and get started in Shmuel Bet. I think Shnayim LeYom was up to, chapter 6 or 7. And again, I'll review the goal of our series. We're not going to discuss every chapter, but rather my main goal of the series is to identify what's the purpose of the book, the prophetic issue facing the nation, that would require or give a reason for Navi to compose a book. In Sefer Yoshua, we talked about we need a book to explain to the people that God kept his promise about conquering the land, and whatever wasn't conquered, the people were to blame and not God, following the theme of Shirat Hazinu. Sefer Shoftim, we explained, was written in the time period of Shmuel to explain that God wants a king even though the people are asking for the wrong reason, and explain why Shmuel on the one hand was right, but why God's giving him the king anyhow, showing when the right person for the king said no, the wrong people took leadership, and let Avimelech and Yiftach and Shimshon, and then how bad the education system was during that time period, and Shabbat living needs to be reformed. That was the whole background to why I need Sefer Shoftim and its message that we need a king, even though asking for the wrong reasons. God wants a king anyhow, and the people have to make sure it goes in the right direction. Our Sefer Shmuel, we began to explain last week. We couldn't identify who the Navi was, but it's definitely a work of a prophet. My assumption was, we posited, that it was written early during the First Temple period, after the split of the kingdom, to establish from a prophetic point of view, to make sure people knew that despite all the question marks, David's dynasty was the choice of God. God wanted David to become king. He wanted his children to become king. He wanted what we call Malchut David. That the choosing of David is eternal, just like God's choice of Am Yisrael is eternal. And even though there's lots of reasons why people might think that Malchut David is not chosen, based on David's own behavior and events that happened during his time period, this has to clear the air, explain what appeared to be bad was actually okay, and when David did do something wrong, he did proper tshuva. That, like the story of David and Bathsheba we'll talk about every next week. David's private militia, but was for a good reason. David joined the Plishtim, but it was a cover story. He was really helping his people. It might appear that he was working with the enemy, and Avner really wanted Avner to become to unite the country, to put him in charge of the army. It was Yoav's fault that he was killed, and what happens later will show us descendants at the end of the book. Okay, so again, we posited that Nabi establishes that in our Sefer Shmuel, and he's quoting, to make his point, he's quoting for the works of 3 earlier prophets, the works of Shmuel, the works of Gad and Natan, and now we're going to go through what each shofet, what the whole book is about. So our whole point last week, with the first 16 chapters, I want to attribute to Shmuel, or the Beit Midrash of Shmuel, and stories that relate to Shmuel. The first 7 chapters, Shmuel the Shofet, establishing that Shmuel was a prophet that everyone accepted. That was the end of chapter 3. How he fixed the corrupt Kuhuna, the priesthood, who was corrupt by the sons of Eli. He fixed that. He fixed the education system, and now he begins to fix the political system. And he also got the people to do tshuva. That was chapter 7, when he gathers the people together in mitzvah and does proper tshuva, and that fixes. He was the only shofet who really did mishpat and got the people to return in the right direction. Then we talked about the next unit, chapters 8 through 12, the people asking for a king, and we have to establish that God indeed wants a king, and he's agreeing to the monarchy, and we have to emphasize, indeed, Shaul was anointed by God and was publicly accepted. After I accept the fact that God wants a monarchy and Shaul was chosen, I need to explain why he was unchosen. And therefore, in chapters 13 and 14, I don't focus on all the great accomplishments of Shaul. I allude to them at the end. But despite his success from the very beginning, the writing was on the wall. It wasn't destined to be eternal. And then the main reason he loses the kingdom, the story with Amalek, and we talked about that sin with Amalek, and why God takes the kingdom away from him and give it to another leader who's going to understand the purpose of kingdom better. But again, if it's God is being choosing David over Shaul, it's not who's more from, who does less, who does more avirot or less avirot. It's not a question of who's a more religious person, but rather who understands the nature of what God expects from a king. And we talked about the idea we need a king who is a somebody who thinks he's a nobody and attributes all of his greatness to God, knows how to listen to God in key events, and how to make his glory God's glory. David does that to the best. We'll see that in Shirat David in his song and all the things he does in Sefer Tehillim, and Shaul doesn't seem to understand that, and that's why he loses his kingdom. But then again, David's appointed forever, and once he's appointed forever, he can't lose it, no matter what happens later on. The book also explains why David's anointed clandestinely, because otherwise Shaul will kill him, and that was one of the key points that we need to clarify why David wasn't anointed publicly. And then we talk about the irony of the story at the end, where he's anointed as a heart. When first he was anointed as a little child, when he was young, that no one took seriously. But later in his life, after he defeated Goliath, we explained that they're looking for a harp player because the reason that the Navi gives for Shaul fumbling all the time and losing his kingdom, that was Ruach Hashem Ra'ah, that led to that. And God's Ruach Hashem Tovah is with David. And the irony of that story is that David is chosen to be the harp player to deal with Shaul's Ruach Ra'ah. And he plays harp for him. And Dafka, it's David, who has Ruach Hashem Tovah, who's going to temporarily solve Shaul's problem. But we explain that as a story happening later and explains why the chapter's out of order. That's what we got up to last week. Now, this week I want to go through the second half of Shmuel Aleph, and I want to attribute this whole unit to the Navi God. Why the Navi God? Because God is the Navi who's with David when he's running away. I want to stop to share for a minute. I will explain something, how to identify who the Navi is. In general, if a Navi is quoted in a work, most likely he's the Navi who wrote it. If a Navi is mentioned in third person, probably another Navi is writing it. Now, when David is running away, let me open up chapter 22 for a second. Where are we? Wait a second, let me share the screen and open up a Tanakh to Shmuel Aleph, chapter 22, I think it is. Okay. So David runs away. We'll get to why he runs away in a minute. What happens? David goes first to his hometown, to Erev Yehudah, and has a bunch of 400 men with him, usually ex-criminals and things like that, brings them together. And then for safety, what does David do? David goes from there to Mitzpeh Moav. Mitzpeh Moav, maybe we'll talk about one day. Most likely that's the area we call Matzada today, because it's in Israel, but looking over to Moab. And then he has family in Moab, because his great-grandmother's from Ruth is from Moab. He tells Melech Moab, Yitzei na'avi v'imi itchem, ad asher yidam ha'yaseh Elohim. Keep this phrase in mind, ad asher yidam ha'yaseh Elohim, until I know what God will do to me. And then, basically, his parents are are kept safe in Moab until it's safe for them to come back. Now listen what happens next. We'll go back to this topic in a second. V'yomer Gad hanavi el David, lo tesheb b'metzuda, leich v'vatar eretz Yehuda ve'elech David v'val charet. We have a direct quote of God talking to David. That's not another Nabi saying that's what God told David, but we have a direct quote by God himself, what he's telling David, lo tesheb b'metzuda. Which, in my opinion, it makes sense that God, the Navi, would be writing this and not Shmuel. Now, Shmuel doesn't die yet. Shmuel doesn't, Perek 3 chapters later. But even though Shmuel didn't die yet, Shmuel retired after the story with Amalek. He's back home in Ramot. David will run away to him later on. And when he runs away to him, we don't find any direct quotes of that conversation, just that we're told he went there. But here I have a direct quote from God, and therefore I want to claim that God is the Navi writing this entire section. Once I identify from chapter 17 onwards as a literary unit that all fits together and has a topic that puts it all together, and in that unit I have a direct quote of the Navi God, it makes more sense that I contribute the whole unit to the Navi God. Now, what's David's whole hashkafa? He's not sure if he really deserves to become king. He's questioning that all the time. And over again, he'll do things, and he'll let God make the final decision. He's not pushing himself to become king. He's going to find out. God will show him in the right direction. Now, who can tell me, someone's listening here, who can tell me why David has to hide his parents by Moab? What's the danger of them living in Bethlehem? Why can't David's parents stay in Bethlehem?
Shaul go after them?
Exactly, because if you want to catch somebody who's on the run, what do? You arrest his parents or his family member, and you tell them, if you don't turn yourself in, I'll do something to your parents. So all David's members and anyone loyal to David has to run away because he's afraid that the king will take the family members, which is a very, very, it's in the Middle East, it's a methodology that works very well. Without bringing in modern Israeli politics, but there's a big question when there's a terror attack. For sure you punish the terrorists who did it, but do you destroy their home? Do you exile their parents, their family members? So a lot of people hold that for the sake of security, you should do that. Other people hold it's not right, but that's the whole issue. But it works. That's the issue, because people will do things if they know their parents or family members will get hurt. It might cause them not to do something. So if you know that your family member is going to be exiled or lose their house, you might think twice before doing a terror attack. Again, I'm not taking sides on the issue. I'm just showing you it's an issue that applied hundreds of years ago as well. Okay, now let's get back to our topic of this unit of God. When the unit began in chapter 17, I think we showed this last week, it's clearly a new literary unit because look how it begins. We have the background of the battlefield, and then we have the introductory line, the David ish Ephratia as Menachem Yehuda Shmo Yishai v'lo Shmona Banim. We're introducing David like we haven't known him before. Even though we mentioned him at the end of chapter 16, we explained this is a different unit by a different Navi. Saying the story of David begins with this battle against Goliath, and that's what makes him famous. So if I look at the story, if I go back and share the wrong screen here, if I share my source sheet, here we are. I want to go chapter by chapter and summarize what this unit of God is doing. Watch what happens. Make it bigger. In chapter 17, this whole unit at the end of Shmuel Aleph is the rivalry between David and Shaul. So in chapter 17, 18, it's David and Goliath in the early years of his life, how he rises to power, what makes him popular and famous. And perspective here of God as the Navi, even chronologically, it might precede the harp player's story. It happened earlier, and we talked about that last week. Now, one of the most important psukim is going to be what causes the jealousy between Shaul and David, and the background to it. And then what I want to explain, I'll go back to that pasuk in a minute. After Shaul is jealous of David, he doesn't want to ruin his reputation. He wants to get rid of David without anyone realizing he was behind it. So in chapter 19, we're going to find various ways that Shaul tries to get himself rid of David, and without anyone realizing he was behind it. Let me stop the share for a second. Who can give me some examples of what Shaul does to make it look like it's an accident? He wants to be dead, but he doesn't want to take responsibility for it. And he doesn't want, give me an example of what he does.
He sends him to battle.
That's right. He sends him to battle with what hope?
That he wants it. He'll get
we send him to the Russian front. It's called, if you remember World War II. We send him to. Now, what happens? It backfires, doesn't it? Why? Because he goes to battle, and what happens? He becomes more popular because he wins the battles. Yeah. Give me another example, not battle, sort of battle related, but more into shidduchim. Remember what did he tell David to do? You want to marry my daughter?
Arolot Plishtim.
That's right. I want 100 Arolot Plishtim with what hope?
Get killed.
That by Orla number 50 or so, he'll get killed. And what happens? He comes back with he doubles the ante, right? He comes back with 200. He becomes even more famous. Give me another example of what he does to try to kill him and make it look like it's an accident.
The game that he Jonathan, right?
Which one?
When he does with Jonathan, the whole game.
No, before then. No, that's already everyone. There, Jonathan knows already. Something
with the spear. With the spear.
He pretending he lost his temper, and I remember some people lose their temper, especially when they're temperamental, and they throw things in anger. Oh my gosh! I didn't realize you were there. I mean that's the Now after that happens, why doesn't David run away right away?
Jonathan convinces him to stay. No,
even before that, he also thought it was an accident. Only the second time he does it, that's when he runs away, when he realizes it's not an accident anymore. The first time it looks like an accident. What I'm getting at, all through chapter 19, everything Shaul is doing, he wants David gone. but he doesn't want to take responsibility for killing him. So he wants to make it look like an accident. Now, in chapter 20, we're going to see, what's he do? He shares the inner cabinet. He doesn't tell the whole country, but what's he do? He tells Jonathan and all of his men, he said, listen, this guy David is a danger to our government. This is a group effort because if he becomes king, we're all finished. So he's hoping this inner cabinet is going to help get rid of we call in the Hebrew the mitbachon, the kitchen cabinet. They're all top secret meetings. It's not public knowledge that David's a public enemy, but within the government, we want the Shabak to get rid of him. Right? And then he's hoping someone who's close to him. And who's the best person to knock him off? His best friend Jonathan. And what happens in those stories? Dafke's inner cabinet is more loyal to David than they are to Shaul, to the fact that his own son and his own daughter give their loyalty to David over their father. And then we have the story of Jonathan and Michal. Now, after David runs away, after the arrows and the Machar Chodesh Haftarah, then what happens? Then there's public knowledge. Then he makes it public that David's public enemy number one. And once he tries to convince the public that David is a threat to the very existence of our kingdom, then what does he want people to do? He wants people to turn him in. What's the best way to get people to turn you in? If someone corroborates with this bandit, what do? You wipe out the whole city. Right. Now, what's that going to secure? When the rumor gets out, and you got to do something drastic. When the rumor gets out, any city, fear knows, if one person in one city corroborates with this bandit, we wipe out the whole city, then what will people do? They'll turn him in. Understand? And I want to explain what's the logic of what he does to Novi Kohanim. Now, poor Novi Kohanim, they had no idea. They were mamash. They had no idea what was going on. But it's really sad. But we'll talk about that topic as well. But what I'm trying to show you as I go through this unit from chapter 17 to the end of Shmuel Aleph, little by little, Shaul first tries to get rid of him, sort of without anyone knowing, then with his inner cabinet, and then finally with the whole nation. But his goal is to get rid of David because, in his opinion, David is the biggest danger to the Jewish people. Now remember, Shaul is a good guy, and he's a good guy, but sometimes you can be a really good guy and do terrible things because you think that the country needs you. And that we talked about a little bit last week when God told Shaul, remember, that no, don't worry, God will take care of the people and it's not up to you. You have to listen to God. Now, in light of that, I want to go back and see a couple of the things in the Prakim inside and show these points. Number one, I want to talk about the first time, what causes Shaul in chapter 18, what causes him to get jealous, how it all begins. It's such a classic case of human nature. So it was sad sometimes here. In chapter 18, Shaul takes David to the army, no longer a shepherd, etc. Jonathan and David become best friends. He gets his thing, and then we talked about last week that Pasuk is when David, just over several years, becomes a full-time member of the army, then becomes an officer, then becomes a general, and he becomes more and more famous. And then, after many years of fighting, after being a general, he's more popular than Shaul. Remember, the women are singing, and they say, now, here's the key line. When Shaul hears that he's no longer on the top 40, David's higher up than he is, then he gets angry. You see the jealousy? David gets tens of thousands, I only get thousands. Like David has way more hits than he has. From that day on, Shaul is Oyen et David. That's cool to see they translate English. Oyen et means like he's jealous, but he has his eye on him, but he's against them all the time. And this hatred begins here. Now, the first thing he does the next day, he has Ruach Limar'ah. What does he do? David's been again, and Shaul takes the Chanit, and what does he say to himself? I kept David over here. And David does a quick ramble move and gets away from it and saved. But David doesn't realize he wants to kill him. He has no idea. Okay? And then Shaul begins to see, what do you call it? God must be with this guy. Ki haya Hashem imo. Now, that's the whole theme of this whole section. That why is David successful? Because God is with him, and he left Shaul. Remember that we saw that last week when Ruach Hashem Ra'ah is now with Shaul, and Ruach Hashem Tovah is with David, and this is now the proof of the story. Okay. So then Shaul takes him away. He makes him a Sar Elef. He makes him a big general to go to war. Okay, but David is very successful. Hashem imo. Here's the key phrase again. Hashem is with him. Okay. Okay. And then Bayar Shaul ki hu maskim ma'od Vayagra Moav. Where's that coming from in Chumash? Remember Vayagra Moav ibnei am kirav kimodu, which is really ironic because David's from Moav. So it's cool. Chumash uses the same word that in the Bilam story. Okay. Okay. On the other hand, V'chol Yisrael Yehuda ohevet David ki hu yotzei uval lifnehem. David, everything Shaul does to get rid of him causes him to be more and more popular. Okay. They gives him, he'll go get engaged, and he brings the 200 Olot Plishtim, and then and we have the story, and then he gets Michal as a wife, and later Michal can help him as well. Okay, and then again, this whole parak is talking about how David rises to power. Whenever David went against the Plishtim, okay, Sachal David Mikol Abdei Shaul Vayikar Shmo Ma'od. He's the most popular of all Shaul's men, people in the army. He becomes Mr. Popular in the country. Which leads us now to chapter 19. What's that we're up to? That was 19. That was 18. Now we're 19. Okay. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Shmuel Bet. My mistake. Shmuel Aleph. We were in 18 now. We did 18, 19. Okay. Now, in chapter 19, he changes his approach. Got it? Now he just shares this with his inner cabinet, his avadav, his ministers, the people in his government, and his own son Yonatan to kill David. And Yonatan's going to stick up for David. Okay? And therefore Yonatan now is more loyal to David and saves him from thing. And basically Yonatan talks sense into his father, and that becomes back like the good old days. Okay? And Vayishma Shaul b'kol Yonatan. Okay? And Shaul promises Chayashim Mamut, and that's a classic Shaul where he swears in God's name, he doesn't keep to his promise. Okay? Then the war continues, okay? And David becomes more and more famous. Now, the next time there's a Ruach Hashem on David, Ruach Hashem, and he throws the Chanit. This time David gets out of it. Then this time he runs away because now he catches on because he knows Yonatan told him his father wanted him killed, but he talks sense into him. But now the second time he tries to spare, he realizes it's not safe to be in the palace anymore. He runs away, and then he runs away to Michal, and Michal saves him. Remember, he stops the blanket, he runs away, and Michal saves his life. Now, one last thing in chapter 20, what happens next is David runs away to Nayot Barama. Remember, he goes to talks to Yonatan and asks, what do you want from me? And then David and Yonatan have a treaty that they're not going to harm each other. Okay. Then we have the famous Machar Chodesh. Now, one quick question on that one. Where are we? Does anyone know the glitch in the story, that the Haftarah of Machar Chodesh? What's David's plan with Yonatan? We're hoping that Yonatan can talk sense into his father again, because it worked last time. Maybe it'll work again. So Yonatan says, I'm going to talk sense into my father, and maybe you'll come back. But maybe I won't talk sense to my father, and maybe he wants you dead. So how can you give him a sign that the coast is clear or not clear? If I shoot arrows far away, it means get lost. If I shoot clear by, you can come by and meet me. Now, what happens? What's the conclusion after the Rosh Chodesh party? Yonatan realizes his father still wants to kill David, and therefore he should shoot the arrows far away, and David should run away. Anyone remembers what happens after he shoots the arrows far away? We'll see in a minute. They shoot the arrows far away and they meet. We'll read what happens now. But what's happening is, in theory, David should run away right away. But Shaul is sure. Yonatan is afraid now his father's going to kill him. If his father wants to catch David, what's the best way to catch him? Put a spy on who? Put a shadow on Yonatan, because he knows Yonatan's going to meet David. So if Yonatan notices anyone's with him, he can't meet David. Yonatan can only meet David if he's all alone. Now, Yonatan's with his arrows, with his nar, with his little helper. Remember, he sends his helper go back home. The helper might stay nearby and not go home. Then he can't meet David. But if the helper goes away, then he can go meet David just for a couple minutes to say goodbye. So I'll show you real quick what happens. That's the next one. Here. Here. Shaul tells him, okay, he'll tell you what will happen, and then but they make the brit, and then so it's Rosh Chodesh, the Rosh Chodesh party, and then we'll go to the next parak when they have the trick with the arrows, and then in chapter 21, I'm sorry, beforehand, the end of chapter 20, my mistake. At the end of chapter 20, what happens? Here. Yonatan tells the Nar, who's with him, who's afraid, who's suspect, maybe he can tell Shaul what's going on. Okay? He says, go catch the arrows, etc. And the Nar doesn't know what's going on. And David Yonatan knew the signals. Okay. So Yonatan gave all his equipment, his arrows and all the bows, etc., to the Nar. And he says, Lech, go bring back to the city. And the Nar goes and leaves Yonatan. And then David gets up down towards the south where he was, south of where they were, and he falls and they meet Yonatan, and they bow down to each other, they kiss each other and say goodbye. But even though the signal was, if it's not safe, go run away, but as long as Yonatan sees that no one's nearby and there's not left, then it's safe to say a quick goodbye to David. And then they make a shua not to hurt each other. And that's the famous end of that story. Now, one last thing in chapter 22, that's going to be 21. David goes to Novi Kohanim, which is nearby, and he gets the food, and then that's where Doeg is. And then when he runs away, and then you remember he meets Achish Gat, and instead of getting killed by him, he pretends like he's a meshuga, and that saves him as well. But again, God is always with him in all these events. Okay, and then God tells him where to hide, etc. And then Shaul has a whole story with he doesn't trust his own cabinet. Now, Doeg Edomi, now he's the one who finally tells that, he was there and saw that David got arms from Novi Kohanim, and everything he did, he got, and therefore they think that Novi Kohanim is corroborating with David. And then what does he do? He kills the whole city. Now, I want to point out one pasuk which I call Gzera Shava. Okay. The Melech tells Doeg, Sova Ufkata Kohanim, and Doeg Edomi does it. Okay? And there's 85 men who were killed, those 85 Kohanim. And then we have a line which is almost impossible to complete. They actually did it. But listen how harsh it sounds. That Nov Era Kohanim Hikab Lefi Charev, Mishvar Isham Yolev Yedunek Mishor V'Chamor V'Sed Lefi Charev. What's that sound like? It should be obvious. There's a Gzera Shava there, isn't there? To what story?
Amalek.
Exactly, Tamalek. Now, what's it saying? It's connecting. Remember that one-time commandment, Tamalek, to wipe everyone out. That's I call it a guzma. It's an exaggeration. There's no value in killing women and children and animals. But the idea is you wipe something out totally. You get the job done. But by using the same wording for what Shaul does to Novi Kohanim, to what he should have done by Amalek, it's saying it's highlighting why he lost his kingdom. Again, we'll do this over and over again. It's a literary tool that the Navi is using to make its prophetic point. About Shaul really thought he was doing the right thing. Wait, that was terrible what he did. But the way he treated Novi Kohanim is what he is comparing to what he did to Amalek, or should have done to Amalek. But it's all highlighting why he's losing his kingdom and why God's angry with him. So let me just finish up now with the rest of the outline. So we had those things. Now David's now public enemy number one, and then what happens? Shaul takes the army to find him, and then God's always helping David. And again, we're proving the thesis that David's rise to power is from God. Now, Why are the people in the army willing to hunt down David? David was the great general, the hero of everything. How could the people in the army, why would they hunt down David? Why would they agree to follow Shaul?
Thought he was more than them all.
Exactly. Once you can have a general who could have been the greatest person, but the second the army he becomes a traitor, so he's a traitor. We have to get rid of him. Now, there's two stories that are very similar, aren't they? The story in the cave in En Gedi. Everyone tries to go to the bathroom. That's probably the best story that explains what's special about David. I'm sure you remember the story. David's hiding out in En Gedi because it's a great place to hide out. There's lots of caves. Shaul's out chasing him. And what happens? This by chance, Shaul goes into a cave and says what? It has to use the restroom. And David has the chance to kill him. What do his men say? They say what's called hashgacha pratis. We'll read the story. Listen to David's attitude, which is exactly what makes him chosen. About how he puts everything in the hands of God. Because a lot of people would say, God's telling you, like his men say, God's telling you, finish him off. Chapter 24. They're in the cave. David. When they see Shaul in the cave. Hine hayom asher amar Hashem elecha hine anochi noten tevecha biyadecha v'yisil kasher yita beinecha v'echem David v'yichut eknaf hamel l'shol balat. His men say, God's putting him in your lap right there. Kill him. And remember, God said you're going to become king. God's telling you, finish him off. What's David do instead? He simply rips his coat, and he's going to use it later as a migo, it's called, to prove he's not out to get him. Okay, and David's even upset that he even cut the king's coat. Okay, now listen to his hashkafa. Right now, he's officially the king. I can save myself by going away. God's giving me an opportunity not to kill him, but to test my ability to become king. In other words, I'm putting my trust in God. If God wants him dead, that's God's problem. It's not my job to kill another person if I can save myself. Okay? And God goes up, and then David goes afterwards, and then he calls out to Shaul and gives his famous migo of, I could have, you should trust me because I could have killed you and I didn't. And he gives a whole big famous speech, and then God should judge between us, etc. And then Shaul says he's sorry, the whole thing. Of course, he changes his mind again later on. Now, that happens once. Then we have the story with Abigail, where Abigail goes and saves him. Then remember, I should mention, why is the story of Abigail there? What's it look like if I didn't know this story? It looks like Debbie goes around killing people and taking their wives, doesn't he? Because what's she always called? Abigail Eshet Naval. Now, what's the Navi tell you? That wasn't what it sounds like. All the tabloids had, David kills this rich guy and takes his wife away. And, he's taking all these wives from other people. If you know the real story, it was totally different. Abigail was trustworthy and he died, I would say natural death, but he died, for his sin, etc. And then he married Abigail afterwards. But it wasn't he killed him. He didn't kill Naval to marry his wife. But a lot of people would have thought that. I need that story to explain that David's actions here were fine. Now, the next story in chapter 26, another story where David can take his, he's able to take his sword. In chapter 26, it's a similar story. After that story, Rabbi Medan gave a beautiful explanation here. After the second story, where David has a migo again, he could have killed him and he didn't, and the whole army hears it, then the army loses their support. Shaul loses the support of the army. Once that happens, the army's not going to chase David anymore. It was every time they chase David, David keeps on winning and getting away with it because God's on his side. But after the second time it happens in public, what does the army realize? That Shaul is not out to get it. He's not public enemy number one. It's a personal issue. You understand the difference? When the country's doing something for national reasons, you follow the king. The second the army realizes the king is doing it for political reasons, for his own jealousy of David, but David's not a national threat, then the army's not behind him anymore. And that's why in the next chapter, in chapter 28, he's going to lose the battle. The next 2-3 chapters, he's going to lose the battle against the Plishtim, and the battle of a fake when he loses. That was what Rabbi Medan's idea was, is that the reason why Shaul, who had such a great army and was so successful against the Plishtim, the reason the army is not with him, and the reason they lose the battle in the Gilboa, is because the army is no longer motivated to help the king, because he's using the army for political reasons. to hunt down David and not for national needs. He brought that example to explain, for political reasons. I won't get into that now. But it's just a beautiful insight how he ties the stories together. Now, probably the most difficult story in this unit is bring up the Balat Ov. Now, does anyone notice any irony in the story? What's the irony in the story when he asked Shaul to bring up? He asked the Balat Ov
because he was killing the wizard.
Part of his great, he got rid of all this. What's a necromancy? What's it called? There's some fancy word.
Necromancers.
Yeah, he got rid of them. He got rid of all the charlatans doing all this magical stuff, and now he's going to them for help because God's not answering him. Now, what's the key line? The key line goes back to the very beginning. What did God tell him to do? When he was first anointed, remember he got those signs. The signs were supposed to guide him in his life. After he was anointed in chapter 10, he gives him the signs. Where are we? In chapter 10, God tells him, here, Vayeki tavono otot, do whatever you want because God will be with you. Except at one time, where God will meet you in the Gilgal, etc., and then wait for me 7 days. Then I'll tell you what to do. And that one time, then in chapter 3, he doesn't listen to God, he doesn't wait. And now when he turns to God, when he needs God, now God doesn't answer him. Now, what happens here in the beginning of chapter 28? The opening line, here, I want to explain something, what otherwise appears to be like Tchias HaMesim. In chapter 28, the Plishtim gather together against war against David, and he wants to go to war with Achish, remember? It looks like he's a traitor, and then he's supposed to go to war, then later they send him back home. Now, look in Pasuk Gimel. Ushmuel met, v'yispirilu kol Yisrael v'yikbru b'Ramah b'Yiro, v'shol Yisrael avot v'edonim b'haaretz. These are two psukim which are a header for the story coming up. Now, Shmuel died already, remember in chapter 25? How did chapter 25 begin? They were told, Vayemat Shmuel, and all Israel came and mourned him, and they buried him in Ramah, and then David had to run away again to meet Bar Paran. Now, can someone tell me, and then that leads to the story of Naval Carmeli down in southern Hebron. Why is Shaul's death going to cause David to run away again? In chapter 24, David is safe because he had his migo, the whole story in the cave, and it's safe now because Shaul just promised, I'm not going to hurt you anymore. He leaves him alone. As soon as Shmuel dies, David has to run away again. If Shmuel dies and David's not king yet, what's that mean to David? Remember, David was told by Shaul, you're going to become king. Now, remember, he was an old man when he said that, and no one took him seriously. Now, all these things are happening, but it's not happening yet. He's not king yet. And Shaul's still king. What might somebody think? Or be that next week's Parsha. Remember, Kototi Mikol HaChasidim, the Yaakov says, maybe I'm not deserving anymore. David's always worried he maybe not be deserving of the kingdom. And now, if Shmuel dies and he's not king yet, and Shaul's still around, maybe David thinks that it's not safe anymore, and he has to run away because now that Shmuel's not around, Shaul might kill him. And sure enough, in chapter 26, he's out to get him again, and then again he's saved at the last minute with God helping him with all those stories. Now, we know from the technical point of view, we know that Shmuel died already. Chapter 28 is a new unit, which I want to attribute maybe to already to the first unit of Shmuel, because it's a background story. It's not telling you that Shmuel died. It says Shmuel had died. But I need that story as introduction because what's going to happen in the story? We're going to bring up Shaul from the dead. Let me explain what I mean. If this book is quoting different sources and putting them together, it's not an ongoing chronology. Therefore, chapter 28 once stood by itself. If I look at chapter 28, what's the background for the story? I need two things to explain the story. I need to know that Shmuel died already, and I need to know that Shaul got rid of the Avot and Yidunim from the land way back. These are previous events. That's the background for the irony of Shaul going to a Balat Ov to bring up Shmuel from the dead. But that's what's called a That's a sentence that opens up a unit. But that's going to make chapter 28 sort of stand alone. And we'll see in a minute why it's inserted. Now, so the Plishtim get up and remember they're ready in the battle of this own Emek Israel. And for those who, there's the Isha, what do you call it? The Isha Shunamit from Shunem, that's in Emek, right below the Geboa. There's a place with that name there today. And then remember, the Shaul's worried that he's going to die the next day. He's looking for help, for guidance, and no one goes to help him. And so then, ironically, what happens? Shaul turns to God. God doesn't answer him. Not in a dream, not in the dream, but God in the dream. And Shaul says, "Okay, I'll go to Balatov." So we have the famous story, and this story depends on your hashkafa. If you believe that such a thing exists, then it's what happened. If you believe it doesn't exist, then it's all either a prophetic dream or it's a hallucination or something. Because no one can prove from this story that you can bring up people from the dead. You have your own hashkafa, whether it's possible, whether you can do things like that, and based on your hashkafa, you read the story. So if someone's convinced, like Radak, that you can't bring up people from the dead, he'll explain the story that she was doing a what's called achizat einaim. She did a sort of a trick kind of thing. If you believe you can, then God allowed her to do it. You're not allowed to do this, but it's doable. Right? That's all machloket among the commentators. I just want to point out the irony of the story, because when was the last time that Shaul saw Shmuel? I'll go back to the story. After Amalek, remember what happened? After the end of Amalek, the last line of the Amalek story. Listen up here. V'lo yesaf Shmuel lirot et Shaul ad yom moto. Right. Now, we see the irony or not? Ki tever Shmuel Shaul v'Hashem dicham ki mlechet Shaul Yisrael. Right. When's the next? Did Shmuel and Shaul ever meet again?
No.
Sure they do.
Maybe.
When? On the day he dies. You ever see the irony in the pasuk? Right? When did he see him the last time? The day that Shaul dies is the last time he saw Shmuel, when he saw him from the dead. Now, what was the last thing you heard from Shmuel? What was Shmuel wearing? Remember that story? Shaul tears his cup. I'm sorry. We have the whole back and forth, and then here. Okay, now okay, he takes his mill and he rips the coat. And what's Shmuel tell him? Listen, this is the last thing he heard from Shmuel. And then the famous that's the last thing he heard from Shmuel. Let's jump now to our parak, chapter 28. He brings up Shmuel from the dead on the day before he dies. What Shmuel tell him? Here. Now we know Shmuel was in Isakim before he became king, before Shaul became king. Who otem me'il? So again, the me'il is in the story. And he bows down. Okay. Shmuel Shaul. Shaul gives a whole reason. Okay. They're fighting and God left me, etc. Okay. And remember? That was his first mistake. He didn't wait for Shaul to tell him what to do. That was back in chapter 10. Okay? And then what Shmuel tell him? Why are you asking me? Vashem sarmi alecha. Word for word. Now it's David. That's exactly the perfect match. Okay, this is taking us right back to chapter 16. Okay? And therefore God's going to give you and Israel in the hands of Plishtim, and tomorrow you and your kids will be with me, and basically you're going to lose the battle. Then Shaul falls down, what do you call it? He's fearful, etc. And then he has what's called a bummus. He basically faints, and they have to give him food to bring him back to life, or bring Shaul back to consciousness, and they give him a meal, and then he wakes up and goes on with his day. Now, again, I don't want to deal with what really happened, if it's a prophetic vision or what the Navi is doing. But the irony in the story is that if I want to understand Shaul's behavior is that during the whole time he's sure that he's right. Remember, I told you the problem with Shaul is that he's mazy, not shogeg, in the sense he's not doing something. He knows it's wrong. He's doing it anyhow. He's sure he's doing the right thing, and therefore his entire career chasing David, he's sure that David is the enemy of the people of Israel. He's sure David is the worst thing that happened to Israel, and it's a mitzvah to get rid of David for the sake of Am Yisrael. He's a patriot, and he's sure the country needs him because of how great he was. When does Shaul finally realize his life had made that critical mistake from way back? When Shmuel told him, you lost your kingdom, God's given somebody else. He says chatati, he doesn't believe, he doesn't mean it. He's just saying chatati to get Shmuel off his back to continue with the ceremony because he's worried about his kavod. During the whole time he's chasing David, Shaul was sure he's doing the right thing. He thinks he's doing a mitzvah like getting rid of David. He's willing to kill other people. Let Jews die, but because David's a big danger. Only on the day of his death, at the last minute, he finally realizes that, oh my gosh, that old rabbi was right. I should listen to him. I think that's the meaning of the dream, of the Balatov. Now, despite all that, what does Shaul do the next day? He goes to battle and fights, despite the prophecy. He meets his fate, but he still fights. There's a battle to fight. He has to fight it, and he goes down like a hero. But he's convinced again to the day he dies that he was doing the right thing until he has that understanding at the very end. But then it's too late already. Anyway, it shows life is very, very tragic. But again, the story is there to explain why David is chosen and why Shaul is unchosen, and behind all those stories. Then we have to finish up that time. We'll stop. Just finish up the last section, and the next thing we have to do next week. So the irony of the story, and then the battle of fake when they lose. Again, the fact that David goes to battle with the Plishtim and leaves at the last minute, we have to explain that David really wasn't planning to go against his people. He was just tricking the Plishtim the whole time. Now, in David's rise to power, we have to, in all these chapters, everyone supporting Shaul meets a death. The question is David behind it or not. David is not willing to take power by people killing his opponents. And therefore, if that Nar Maliki, who took the crown and thought he'd get rewarded, he has to be killed. The people who cut off the head of Rechav and Baana, Rechav and Baana cut off the head of Ishbosheth, who takes over for his father, he'll kill them. Everyone's expecting David to be a politician and award people who are against his enemy. No. In David's eyes, Shaul is not an enemy. It's an unfortunate tragedy that he didn't understand what was going on, but he's doing everything to unite the nation, and therefore, that's why he calls Abner to become the head of his army. David's doing everything to unite the people. He won't come into power until everyone accepts him. And therefore, the end of the unit, and we'll end the shir with that, how's the unit end? It's the beginning of chapter 5, which I really think belongs in chapter 4. After all those events that were the prakim of the last couple of days, listen to what he does. David's waiting for this moment. He says over and over again, he's not going to let anybody, where does it say here? These Rechav and Baana bring him. They bring the head of Ishbosheth. Vayom David Rechav and Baana Rechav bin Rimon Beroti. Vayomer lehem. Chai Hashem asher bad nafshi mikol tzara. Ki amagid it's the person who told me that Shaul died. That Nar Maliki. And he was only giving the news. I executed him. You people who executed a righteous person, he didn't deserve to die, Ishbosheth. And when you killed him when he was asleep, of course I'm going to kill you. And David has them executed. Okay? And they're buried in Hebron next to Abner. Now, the next chapter, chapter 5, this is what happens. V'yavo kol shiftei Yisrael David Hebrona. David doesn't force himself. What's he do? He waits for people to come to him. His capital city is Hebron in the meantime. All the team come to David to Hebron. And what did the people tell him? Hinenu atzmecha b'sarcha anachnu. Now they realize that David's winning. They're afraid of David's retaliation. They come and say, no, we're all behind you. And then he said, we were voting for you all along. Even when Shaul was king, we knew that you were going to become you were the big leader. And everyone knew that there's rumor going around that there's prophecy of God, that God told you you're going to lead the people. Okay? Now, all the elders of Israel, because remember, every tribe has its local leadership called the Shnayim. and they make a brit with the king in Hebron in front of God. David becomes king, and now there's a brit between God and the people and the king. See the three-way brit? A king is not king because God anointed him. When God anoints David, he has the potential to become king. You're not king until people accept you. And David only becomes king now when all the elders of Israel gathered together in Hebron to make him king. So then Moshe David, and then he's king over the whole country. But he was waiting for this moment where everyone accepts him. So starting in chapter 17, the story of his rise to power and all the rivalry between them, the rivalry is finally over, and David attains kingdom not through forcing himself on the nation. He waits for the nation to come to him. So even though God told him you're going to become king, he doesn't take the kingdom by force. He waits for the people to come to him. He lets God get rid of his enemies. He won't get rid of his enemies. Anyone who tries to fight his enemies, he's going to execute them because he doesn't want to come into power by people being traitors to Shaul's government. Then David becomes king, and the first thing he does, he moves his capital city to Yerushalayim to unite the country. That we'll talk about next week, why David can't build the Beit HaMikdash. But we'll end with now is just looking at the where's my source sheet again? Oh, here. Stop the share. I just want to look at who the Nevi'im are in all these different sections. The next section is about David becoming king over all of Israel. But that section here, I want to attribute God to the end of Shmuel Aleph and the first 4 chapters of Shmuel Bet, maybe the first couple lines of chapter 5. But now we begin Machut David with the opening statement, Ben Shoshim Shana David B'Mocho. The first thing David does, he moves his capital to Yerushalayim. He captures the city, moves the city there to unite the country. He brings the Aron to Yerushalayim. He wants to build a house for God in Yerushalayim. And then eventually want to build the temple. And next week, what I want to talk about, we'll finish Sefer Shmuel next week. We'll talk about why David can't build the Beit HaMikdash, why he wants to, why he can't, and why later his son will. And how this all fits into the story of David and Bathsheba and the story of Avshalom's revolt. So again, and then we'll see at the end of the book, we'll have another set of prakim that happened earlier that will attribute to God. But if I want to put the book together, there's a unit from starting in chapter 5 of Machut David, which Natan is the key Navi, because when he wants to build a house for God, Natan says yes, but Natan's involved in all this. And Natan's the Navi involved with David's sin with Bathsheba. And later in the stories at the end of the book, which happened earlier in David's life, we're going to attribute them to the Navi God. Why we saved them for the end of the book, we'll talk about next week's share. Any quick questions? The goal today was to
be any saving grace.
Excuse me?
The story of Doeg, there's a Rashi or someone at the beginning who says that he's like some big tzaddik, right? And then we see nothing positive about him, right? That he's dolem, whatever, like something that he's very immersed in Torah. Any idea where Rashi gets the idea that he's good? Because he's awful, right?
We have the same thing with Sheba ben Bichri. We say he was the not Sheba ben Bichri, the other guy, the guy who throws stones at David when he's running away from the city. Is Sheba? No, it's not Sheba ben Bichri. Who's that? It's
Shimi ben Gera. Shimi ben Gera.
Yeah, Shimi ben Gera. They say he was Rebbe, he was David's Rebbe. We'll talk about that next week. Yeah. We'll see why Chazal say why he's his Rebbe. It'll explain why he doesn't build the Beit HaMikdash also. The whole story there. In the road of Midrash, that happens a lot. But in general, Doeg, the question is he Jewish Doeg Edomi? Because he's definitely an Edomite. And but kings they had foreign guards, like foreign legions sort of protecting the king. Because if you have a bodyguard who there's no threat that he'll take over your kingdom because he's a foreigner. Some people like foreign mercenaries to come and help you in protecting your country.
He's an Edomi.
Yeah, he's an Edomite. Same thing also, the Uri Achiti. The question is, the Hittite, are these people all, is that where they came from? Right? Are they converts or are they just outsiders? That's a big question when we get to their names. It seems like he's more, Doeg Edomi is more dedicated to Shaul than he is to his people. Because no one else would kill the Kohanim. But that's one of the key events that why Shaul loses. It's not the reason why he lost his kingdom. He lost it beforehand, but it shows why he's not fitting for the king. Because it's his kavod that's more important than the nation. You understand what the problem? When the king's kavod, when the king's own ego thing overrides his sense of judgment, he's willing to kill a whole city of Kohanim and all the women and children, all because he hates David, because he thinks David's an enemy of the country when he really isn't. And his hatred of David is all because out of jealousy. And he's blinded by that. So when your political decisions are tainted by your own jealousy and your own ego, then that's a trait the king can't have. And David's exactly the opposite all the time. Yeah, so we'll see about the whole idea of why David wants to build the Mikdash, why he can't. I'll deal with that next week and see how it explains the end of the book.